Comanche vs. Cavalry, Blanco Canyon, Texas, 1871. May 1871, Salt Creek Prairie ran red with blood. 7 men were tortured to death, their bodies bristling with arrows. Like a porcupine's quills, nothing could be more horrifying, more gut-wrenching than the sight of the Salt Creek Prairie massacre. Lieutenant Robert Carter later recalled with a shudder. But the most chilling part, the Comanche warriors nearly captured General William T. Sherman himself. What drove the Comanche to such ruthless violence? And what pushed the U.S. Army to stop at nothing? To destroy them? Join native legends and history stories as we uncover the brutal truth behind this deadly conflict. Subscribe now for more gripping tales from history. The hunt begins in October of 1871. Lieutenant Robert Carter received orders that would thrust him into one of the most harrowing military campaigns of the American West. Find them, bring them to heel, commanded his superiors. The 4th Cavalry's mission was clear: hunt down the Comanche. The expanding American frontier was perfectly captured in John Gast's painting, American Progress, which hung in many frontier homes. In this idealized vision, settlers moved westward like an unstoppable tide, backed by railroads, telegraph lines, and the full might of the United States. Before them, Native Americans and buffalo retreated into the shadows of history. This was no mere painting. It was prophecy, policy, and pride wrapped in canvas. President Grant's Indian policy hinged on assimilation. In a private letter to General Sherman, Grant had written, "We must protect them from white encroachment, while guiding them toward Christianity and civilization." These weren't just words. The very same terms appeared in his inaugural address. Grant genuinely believed his approach was humane, a gentle hand guiding Native peoples toward what he considered a better life. But what happens when people reject your better life? They don't want your God, they don't want your ways. A frontier soldier wrote in his journal, "And they'll die before they accept them." The Comanche resistance. Among those who most fiercely resisted were the Comanche, a people the U.S. military classified as the most powerful and dangerous of all Indian tribes. This wasn't hyperbole. Military records attributed more deaths and destruction to the Comanche than all other Western tribes combined. Their domain, known as Comancheria, stretched across vast territories, and they defended it with tactical brilliance and unflinching ferocity. For settlers pushing into the edges of Comancheria, fear became a constant companion. Raids weren't occasional, they were frequent, methodical, and devastating. One Army colonel assessed the situation in stark terms: if these Indian marauders continue unchecked, this entire territory will be abandoned. The settlers will simply vanish. His words proved prophetic. As homesteads stood empty, their owners fled or dead, the rumors that circulated about the fate of those taken in raids haunted frontier communities. Parents frightened disobedient children with whispers of Comanche raiders. Women practiced shooting, vowing never to be taken alive. Men slept with loaded rifles beside their beds. This wasn't paranoia, it was survival. The Salt Creek Massacre then came May 18th, 1871, the day that would change everything. A wagon train of 12 men moved across Salt Creek Prairie, hauling supplies to frontier forts. Their wheels left deep tracks in the dirt. Wagon master Henry Warren, sawdust rising in the distance. Moments later, over 100 Kiowa and Comanche warriors rode toward them, their ponies kicking up the ground. "Run, there's too many," Warren shouted. 5 teamsters managed to flee into the brush. The warriors, more interested in the valuable supplies, didn't pursue. One man, Samuel Elliott, raced 18 miles to Fort Richardson, his horse lathered and heaving. "They've got the others," he gasped to the soldiers at the gate. "For God's sake, send help." A rescue party discovered a scene of horror. Lieutenant Robert Carter later wrote, "There could be nothing more appalling, heart-rending, or sickening to the human senses than the spectacle of the Salt Creek Prairie Massacre. 7 men lay dead, their bodies bristling with arrows. Some were decapitated, their scalps taken as trophies. The earth beneath them had turned dark crimson. A fiery death. Evidence showed that one man had fought back fiercely. For this defiance, the warriors captured him, stripped him naked, and tied him spread eagle to a wagon wheel. Slowly, deliberately, they built a fire beneath him, roasting him alive. His remains told a story too horrific to describe. In official reports, Sherman's close call. In a twist of fate that same day, the Warren wagon train had encountered General William T. Sherman himself, traveling with a small escort of 20 soldiers. Had the Cayuga and Comanche attacked, then they might have killed the commanding general of the United States Army. Sherman had ridden on, unaware of how close he had come to death. An hour later, the warriors chose the wagon train as their target. Instead, Sherman's fury. When Sherman learned of the massacre, his face hardened. A witness described him as cold with fury. This was the moment America's Indian policy shifted. The damage on the frontier had become intolerable. Settlers had been pleading with Sherman for years to stop the raids, claiming hundreds of deaths. Now Sherman had nearly been a victim himself. "No more," Sherman declared. "This ends now." Satanta's arrest. At a council at Fort Sill, a Kiowa chief named Satanta boasted openly about the attack. "I led the raid," he proclaimed, apparently believing his status would protect him. "I killed 7 men." Sherman's response was immediate. He ordered Satanta arrested. The chief and several others were convicted of murder and imprisoned, an unprecedented action against tribal leaders. The new order. Sherman's new orders echoed across the frontier. Pursue these murderers into the heart of their territory. Bring the Quahati Comanche to the reservation by force, or wipe them out completely. The Army's objective had transformed. No longer would they simply protect the borders of settlement. Now they would penetrate deep into Comancheria, the Wolf's Den as they called it, with a clear mission: find the raiders and destroy them. This wasn't just another campaign. It was a fundamental shift in American policy toward Native resistance. As one officer noted in his diary, "We are not merely defending anymore. We are hunting." And Lieutenant Robert Carter was about to lead the hunt into hell itself. The High Plains, a land of death. The High Plains presented the U.S. military with its final and perhaps most formidable conquest. This wasn't merely difficult terrain. It was actively hostile to those who didn't understand its ruthless nature. No trees provided shelter from the elements. Water sources were scarce and hidden. The climate itself seemed designed to break both body and spirit. To the fort, accompanied by winds that didn't cool, but rather functioned like blowtorches, capable of destroying entire crops within days. These same winds burned eyes, cracked lips, and dehydrated bodies with alarming speed. When autumn yielded to winter, the notorious northers arrived. Sudden gale force winds from the north that could plunge temperatures from comfortable to life-threatening within hours. At dawn, Carter joined Captain Edward Hale with a small detachment to pursue the horse thieves. The group included Private Candor Gregg, a soldier Carter had served with for years, and trusted implicitly. Hale's men, mostly new recruits, were an unknown quantity. The trap unfolds following the raiders' trail. They rode a mile or two from the main force, when they discovered a small group of Comanche, rounding up some of the stampeded horses, when spotted the warriors fled on horseback, drawing Carter Hale and about 10 soldiers into pursuit. This pattern showing a small force, then retreating, to draw pursuers away from their main body of support, was a standard Comanche tactic. It exploited the natural aggression of cavalry officers and their reluctance to return empty-handed as the soldiers pursued down ravines and across arroyos. They were being systematically separated from their reinforcements. Upon cresting a small hill, the trap became evident. Captain Hale was the first to recognize their predicament. Heavens, but we are in a nest. The enemy revealed there on the bluff rode hundreds of warriors naked to the waist, both men and horses covered in war paint. Many wore the distinctive war bonnets and feathered headdresses that signified accomplished warriors. Carter's tactical assessment was immediate and stark. There was no cover where they stood, and they faced overwhelming numbers. He ordered the men to spread into a line, to protect their flanks and begin a slow, disciplined retreat toward an arroyo that offered some protection. The Spencer carbine's rapid fire kept the advancing Comanche at bay temporarily, and Carter hoped the sound would alert Mackenzie to send reinforcements. The line breaks. What happened next revealed the limitations of military discipline. Under extreme stress, 2 of Hale's new recruits broke formation and fled in panic, compromising the defensive line. Carter and the remaining men continued fighting, but their position was deteriorating rapidly. The fall of Private Kander Gregg, riding 10 yards to Carter's right, suddenly called out, "Lieutenant, my horse is giving out." The exhaustion of Gregg's mount, likely already tired from the previous day's march, sealed his fate. The Comanche warriors, with their system of multiple fresh horses, identified this vulnerability instantly. Quanah Parker strikes, leading the charge, was a warrior Carter would later identify as Quanah Parker. Carter described him as the incarnation of savage. Brutal joy. His face was smeared with black war paint, which gave his features a satanic look. This description, while reflecting 19th century perspectives, acknowledged the psychological dimension of Comanche warfare, the visual transformation into beings meant to inspire terror. As Parker approached, Carter tried to intervene, but the Comanche leader expertly stayed to the outside, using Gregg's slower horse as cover. Carter shouted for Gregg to draw his sidearm, but it was too late. Parker rode alongside, placed his pistol to Gregg's head and fired. Carter watched helplessly as Private Gregg fell dead from his horse. What he would later call the second tragedy of Blanco Canyon, the unexpected withdrawal. In a move that puzzled the soldiers, Parker and his warriors immediately withdrew, without stopping to take Gregg's scalp or weapons. Traditional practices that would have been expected. The reason soon became clear as a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Mackenzie had heard the gunfire and was approaching with the main force. The warriors' abrupt retreat suggested another dimension to their strategy. Carter recalled hearing women's screams during the earlier fighting, an indication that the Comanche village was nearby. Parker wasn't just leading a raiding party, he was buying time for his people to evacuate. While warriors on fresh mounts could easily evade soldiers, moving an entire village of women, children, and elders required more time. The chase to Cap Rock, the 500 American soldiers now pursued the Comanche westward toward Cap Rock Escarpment. The dramatic geological formation marking the edge of the high plains. As they approached, the Comanche retreated up a steep bluff. Women at the top called down to the warriors below, while Comanche marksmen provided covering fire. Quanas forced the Tonkawa scouts, ancient enemies of the Comanche, shouted insults across battle lines, adding an intertribal dimension to the conflict. These weren't just battles between Americans and Comanche, but the latest chapter in complex, indigenous power struggles that predated European arrival. Carter's injury, leading a group of men up a trail to the plateau. Lieutenant Carter's horse took a turn too sharply, and his leg smashed against a boulder. The impact, which he described as sounding like the crack of a pistol, caused him to lose consciousness. When he recovered, he found his men giving him water. But the pursuit had been lost. The Comanche horses, fresher than the American mounts, had carried the last of the Quahati out of sight, into the hills and ravines. His injury was severe, his leg badly swollen, black and blue covered with clotted blood. But when Mackenzie offered to send him back to the fort, Carter refused. "If it is left to me, I go forward with the command." Before allowing Carter to return to duty, Mackenzie questioned him about Captain Hale's actions. During the ambush, Carter's response, that Hale and his men had merely made an error, reflected the complex code of military brotherhood. Despite potentially career-ending mistakes, officers rarely criticized each other's battlefield decisions. To superiors, Carter's physical suffering, riding with a severely injured leg that required his boots to be cut off, added a dimension of personal sacrifice that military reports rarely captured. Yet this individual determination, multiplied across hundreds of soldiers, formed the operational backbone of the Frontier Army, a vanishing act following the Comanche Trail. Carter, Mackenzie, and 500 soldiers rode alongside the Brazos River toward the massive Caprock Escarpment, the imposing natural barrier to the high plains. Late in the afternoon, as the canyon opened into a valley, they discovered what they had been searching for: the remains of the main Comanche village. The site stood empty, yet told a remarkable story of tactical evacuation. In mere hours, the Quahati had moved over 1,000 people, more than 3,000 horses, and hundreds of lodges. Lodge poles and heavier valuables lay scattered on the ground, clear evidence of a hasty departure. Carter noted with admiration how a community of this size had vanished so completely, leaving just enough trace to confirm their recent presence. The Comanche Edge. This abandoned village revealed a core truth about Comanche power: their mobility. It wasn't merely a military tactic, but an entire social organization, optimized for rapid movement. Even their most substantial settlements could transform into mobile units when threatened, a capability that conventional military doctrine struggled to counter. The trail left by the fleeing village demonstrated sophisticated evasion techniques. Paths crossed and recrossed themselves, creating a confusing web designed to slow pursuers. Yet by the morning of the second day, it became clear that the Comanche were ascending the Caprock Escarpment of military discipline. Under extreme stress from the rolling plains below,